I'd like to welcome everybody that is trickling in. We've just completed a few housekeeping items. Now, I would like to officially start this year's NACM National Forum, Indigenous Midwifery Beyond Birth. Today, I would like to introduce Maria Campbell, who will be opening the forum for us today. Maria Campbell is a Cree Métis writer, playwright.
Hi, Evelyn.
Hi,
Evelyn,
sorry.
sorry, I'm just gonna jump in. Maria opened yesterday, and we're gonna welcome Laura Mayer today to open.
Okay,
So
let's.
Laura is the new executive director of NCIM, and we'd love to hear from Laura.
Anibajo, everybody. Nigom kwed nigo Laura Mer Deshna cause, Meswe Zaging Donjiba, Mishike Dem, Nadaya Nuswe Beno Jiak, Deninim Jonkosot Wabi Masqua Minwa, Neepsing Jibad, Naja Kinoma Gamik, Neepsing U, Minwa Osgood Hall, Danoki NCIM. So, good morning, everybody. I'm so pleased to meet you all today and see you all today. My name is Laura Mayer. I am so honored to introduce myself as the new AD of NCIM. I'm from Mississauga First Nation, located on the north shore of Lake Huron. I'm an Anishinaabe, a mom, a community member, and someone who has spent my career working to strengthen Indigenous rights, self-determination, and governance. I'm a lawyer, please don't tell anyone. But since graduating, I have exclusively worked for First Nations. But first and foremost, I come to this role as somebody who deeply believes in the power of Indigenous midwifery because I've experienced it firsthand. In 2012, when I was starting my second year of law school, I found out I was pregnant. Now, attending law school was normal at that time, was tough enough, but add pregnant Indigenous woman with imposter syndrome to that, and it becomes next to impossible. And I think that I Googled Indigenous birth Toronto, and Seven Generation Midwives was the first link. And I'm so grateful that that is where I received my service, where I got to go to Sunnybrook. I had midwives who really understood my experience and supported me through that, being in school and being a pregnant and being a first-time mom. And it allowed me to feel in control. And the teachings that I received there, I took to heart. And I think it started my fascination of all things birth. Just the other day, somebody had accidentally introduced me. They said they had heard that I was ED of NCIM, and they introduced me as a midwife. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, I only wish I was that cool. I'm a lawyer instead. But I really appreciate midwifery and everything that you guys do every day. And so my undergrad was in gender equality and social justice, and so I already had this basis in theories of power and inequality. But being an Anishinaabe pregnant person made it all kind of come home. Midwifery touches everything: cultural transmission of knowledge, rites of passage, child protection, nationhood, belonging, health and well-being, infant mortality, parenthood wellness, and communities raising up children. And it made me more than proud to later on be able to write Nipissing First Nation on the birth certificates of my two younger children, next to the names of midwives at Taganing. So I think through all of this, I've seen what real change happens when we take back our inherent rights, not just in policy, not just in law, but in practice. And that's exactly what Indigenous midwives do every single day. And so as I step into this role, my priority is to serve you, the incredible midwives who are keeping our traditions alive, fighting for recognition, and providing care that is rooted in who we are as Indigenous peoples. I see my role as an advocate, a support, and someone who will work tirelessly to ensure that you have what you need to do your work. I'm so excited for the journey ahead. And I know that together we can continue to build on the work that you've already done. So Chimigwech, thank you for all that you do. I look forward to working with you, supporting you, and learning from you. And let's get back to all of the sessions that we have lined up today. So Chimigwech, everybody, and hope to see all y'all soon.
Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing with us. We are so happy to have you as a part of the team to advance our important work. It is now time to get started with our first presentation. Roots of Wisdom, Knowledge Gained from My Birth Experiences. This presentation will be brought to us by Martha Rogers. Martha Rogers is an Indigenous mother of 7 who was born in Inuvik almost 36 years ago to her Inuvik father and her mother, who is of Norwegian ancestry. She currently resides in Whitehorse, Yukon, on the traditional territory of the Kwanlindun First Nation and Tanakawan Council. She is a neurodivergent mother, daughter, granddaughter, sister, auntie, friend, hairstylist, advocate, comedian, seeker of truth and justice, and hopes to continue learning for the rest of her life. She is passionate about birth stories and hopes we can shift towards creating a holistic, safe environment for all birthers. The effects of traumatic birth experiences can impact a family for a lifetime and can be fatal without proper, holistic mind, body, and spirit postpartum care. It can inhibit our ability to actively be involved in parenting, coping in unhealthy ways, terrified to ask for help, fearing the loss of our children to the systems that have caused so much of the generational trauma that we are healing from. Often we feel isolated and ashamed when experiencing PPD, PPA, PPSD, etc. As fellow humans, we know it's of utter importance to build connection and know people's baselines so that they don't have to ask for help. Often we hear it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to support a parent. We can shift our futures by reclaiming birth as a sacred and powerful experience it is. Not saying it doesn't hurt. I will hand it over to Martha to share her learnings with us.
You just gave the whole thing away. I didn't realize I wrote such a long beginning. So I think I'll start with my share. Where are we? Well, good morning, everybody. I am honored to have been chosen to do this. I was a little bit shocked when I got the email saying that you were chosen, and but then I'm also not shocked at the same time because I think that we need to use our voices. We need to be completely involved in the shifts that need to happen. And we can't hide away any longer or silence ourselves any longer. So there is the title. This picture was from my 5th birth, and I would say that this was one of my favorite births. My mom has been to every birth. She has been definitely the main supporter of me. She's cut many cords. So I really found this one to be inspiring when I was looking for different quotes. And it really does impact me because I have 7 children, and my Nanak, Emily, she also had 7 children, but she didn't have the honor of raising her 7 children. She lost them to residential schools and the 60s scoop. So I'm taking my job as a mother very, very seriously, and I know she's with me today. So in my experience, I've come to recognize that every person is different. And in my experience, so is every pregnancy and birth. I haven't had a single birth that has been the same. I have never had the same doctor or the same nurses at the births, even though we're a fairly small place. My first pregnancy was lost, at 16 weeks. I hadn't had any care. I had gone in to the emergency ward after the loss, and they scheduled an ultrasound, and I was like, okay. I went in, and the ultrasound tech was like, well, there's no fetus in here. And I was like, no, there shouldn't be. But it was just like this disconnect of communication that had happened and was extra traumatizing to that loss. My second pregnancy we started, 3 months after that loss. And it was stressful because I had blamed myself for the loss. I had, oh, I had coffee, or I had too hot of a bath, or all of the different ways that we blame ourselves for everything that goes wrong. Um, and the doctor who delivered her when she came to term was crying, and I was like, "Hey, um, are you okay?" Like, as I had just given birth, "Are you okay?" Because I do that. I'm very aware of everybody around me and making sure that they're okay, even in the times where I should be the one that's checked in on. And she said that's exactly how it should be. And I found out then that it was her very first solo delivery, and I'm so glad that it had gone as well as it had gone. Um, my third pregnancy that had happened was, as if you are reading, I had a screen positive for Down syndrome. I was only 21 years old, so it was you get shipped out for genetic counseling and extra ultrasounds, and they tell you, okay, you have a lower chance, but you still go through the pregnancy with that stress of what is my life going to look like? Is it, and you envision yourself and you do the research and you just like you hope that it's and then he was born typical and normal, and he was born right on his big sister's birthday, 2 years apart. And she was a little bit mad. She's actually been mad since the every year because he crashed her party. And I actually had to grieve my Downs baby that I had prepared for, because I was so like involved with the research and figuring out and different, and I had to grieve that baby and welcome this other baby that was completely himself. And my fourth, that's where, or pregnancy, but my third live birth, um, that's where things started to get even more complicated. He had a single artery umbilical cord, and then of course that's a genetic, like it's a marker for Down syndrome as well. I was 23 at the time, and I had to do the whole travel thing and all the counseling, and he was fine. But when he was born, I was in the OR within 20 minutes. It was a slow trickle hemorrhage, and they hadn't seen a hemorrhage that harsh in well over 10 years. So I had the DNC and the full, in the recovery room, they realized I was still hemorrhaging. And so they put me back into the um, OR and started to, put the balloons in, and then the balloons kept popping out because your body just wants to get everything out. And then they had to put the packing and catheterize my uterus and my bladder. And then it was 24 hours of laying there, because of gravity. And then that's where the next day when I was receiving the blood transfusions, my partner was escorted out by security along with his parents for um, being abusive and manipulative and all of those things. So at that point, 23 hours after nearly dying, giving birth to his son, he was making it about himself and was very not supportive. And then let's go on to the next here. So my fifth was a perfect pregnancy and delivery. She, was 8 pounds, 4 ounces, and that's the time, like with my fourth live birth, fifth pregnancy, where I learned the importance of who is welcome in the birthing space. And I mean, that's like a lot of babies to have to finally learn that important piece, like because my last, where the hemorrhage had happened and all of that, like my support team, they were all enemies. Like they all didn't like each other, and the chaos around that and the energy was just so off. And then the hemorrhage and that, like, it was just so chaotic. And so with my fifth, her name is Selah, which means to pause and reflect. And it was definitely like a pause. It was a reflect. It was like all of that in one. And in some ways, I regret naming her that because she often needs to like pause and she takes forever to go anywhere. And then, so then with my fifth, my my fifth baby, um, I had an appendectomy, so meaning I got my appendix removed via an urgent open surgery at 28 weeks. I was told when I woke up, if I wasn't pregnant anymore, my baby was medevaced and likely in a different city. And I woke up and I was still pregnant, and I basically was like, okay, like how do we do this? Like, and they wouldn't let me leave because of the appendix and what it does. It will shut down your entire system when it's not happy. And so they're like, you can't leave until you poop. And I was like, okay, so how do, I wasn't pooping and I was on day 6 of not pooping. And so the nurse brings me this little bottle with and she goes, you just need to stick this up your butt and hold it in for as long as you can, the fluid, and lay this thing down. And here I just had open surgery, and I was in pain and I could barely move, and I'm supposed to like lay there and uh so then I couldn't hold it in for very long before I was waddling to the toilet, and all I got from that was like a tiny nugget. And I brought the nurse in so excited because I had just like I pooped, I could go home. And she said, that's not enough. And I said, okay, I'll try again. So I got my friend to bring me all these things, prune juice, kombucha, like all of the things so that I could poop bigger for the nurse to let me go home. Um, of course, when you have a surgery, like an open surgery, you can't lift over 10 pounds. I was going home to 4 children. One was only 2 years old and still requiring me to lift her into her car seat. And so when I left the hospital, I went and I got my van washed so that she could climb in without getting dirty. And then I was instructed to come back if there was any signs of labor. So I said, okay. So at 38 weeks, I basically went into labor, and I had a support team that I wanted there, and it was going along great. I got to 3 centimeters and everything stopped. And I thought, okay. So then they said, well, just go home. Go home. And I have anxiety about going home because I don't want to give birth in a car. It's just something that I just don't really want to do. So after going home, they said, we'll see you this weekend. It'll start up again. You're 3 centimeters. And so I made it to my next doctor's appointment, and they checked me again. And I said, and she goes, well, I've never seen this before. You closed right back up. And I was like, no, like I've heard my one cousin happened to her. And I said, no, that's not even possible, as I judged her for lying to me. And I didn't know, but I think the universe was trying to show me that yes, it is possible, because then it closed right back up for 2 weeks. And my support team that I originally had wasn't even available. So I went into labor, and this is where I had my mom, and I had hired a birth photographer to come in because I don't birth generally without more than 2 people of my choice in the room with me. So with that, it was very fast. We got to the hospital at 5 a.m. and he was born by 7 a.m. And he had the cord around his neck 3 times and up and around his arm. So he came out like Superman, and I could feel him seat belted in. That's what they called it anyways, and that he needed to be born. So he was born with one big push. So all of those were actually fairly uneventful births, and the next birth is where it is the most it was the most traumatic. So this is the empty room, where my baby, basically her breathing wasn't like her lungs weren't functioning properly, and as soon as she was born, they moved her into the nursery and they called the medevac team. And this is, it's Whitehorse. It's a hospital. It's, they have the oxygen. So they took her to the nursery where the oxygen is coming out of the walls. So with this child, her conception was the result of a sexualized assault. And so many people have asked me, why would you keep a baby? And it is because I truly 100% believe that she is meant to be here. And I really thought that I was alone in this, but when I started researching as I do, I rabbit hole, I found that I'm not the only person who has birthed a baby conceived in such a way. And that was healing in itself, finding out that there's so many, and assault can happen in marriage. It can happen in, it's not just a violent act necessarily. It's just the act against your spirit, against a part of you that dies. Like I literally felt like that person had died. And so I let my team know, like the medical team know, like this is what has happened, knowing that I would need support. That's where I dove into therapy. And I saw my counselor, my therapist, once a week, sometimes twice a week, and she really encouraged me to like keep moving forward. And I was struggling with nightmares and everything that comes along with PTSD, triggers. I remember going into my doctor's appointment, and at that time, COVID had just kind of erupted. It was 2020, 2021, and they weren't letting you just go in and sit in the waiting room. Like you had to get screened in. So you go into this little glass box. And I remember this man coming in behind me and breathing, and his breathing had triggered me. Like I started to sweat and I started to panic, and I just like the breathing it was so loud. And I rushed in through the door when they like buzzed me in, and I just like, okay. And I, made sure that I was safe, and I just like brought my heart rate down, and that's when I knew that I needed to get onto medication to help me, stop with the nightmares and, start being proactive about, knowing that this is traumatic. You have a higher chance of postpartum depression. You have a higher chance of anxiety and all the things that go along with that. And then your chances are higher because you're also not sleeping as often, and you're not all of those things. Like it's It's so much. So from that point, I up until about 3 weeks to when she was born, it was therapy. It was all everything. It was medication. It was, and reading through all of the different stories and really gaining my strength. I still had fears. I had fears that I wouldn't be able to bond with her. What if she didn't look like me? Like all of those emotions of feeling and trying to like be so strong. And so I was afraid that, the guy would be outside the hospital waiting for me after giving birth. And I had all of these different things that were so just, I mean, rational, but irrational. And, um, and at that time we were only allowed to have one supporter. So I hired a doula. Um, So you could have your one support, which was my mom. And then because of my traumatic hemorrhage with baby number 3, I I needed someone there to support her if anything were to go wrong. Um, and it was locked down. Like we were so locked down. Like if you came into the room, you weren't allowed to leave at all. So we were locked in there together. It's a bit like jail. And it wasn't going as fast as the medical team was hoping because I'd gone to my appointment that day. I was 4 centimeters dilated. But of course, I was like, okay, I have some time. So I was like, I'm just gonna run some errands, go home, grab my stuff, and go to the hospital. And she's gonna meet me there and break my waters, and it's gonna be so fast. It was the longest labor of my life. It wasn't going as fast as they were wanting it to go. And this is where I realized that I hadn't used my voice enough. The labor itself was like just continuing on, like it was so long. And that's when they said, you know what, let's just try some oxytocin. And I was like, yeah, okay, like let's do it. Because I'm a yes person. I'm fairly trusting, and open, and I like to be that way. It's definitely put me in vulnerable situations, but here I was, okay, my IVs are already in, and they started it, and I got to the 4, and I was like, I think I'm good. Like this is really kicking up, and I'm good. I'm like, let's just keep it here. Like if that's possible, let's keep it here. I'm feeling it. I think my body's really, really kicking in again. And so, and then it was really kicking in and really kicking in and really kicking in. And my doula was finally like, hey, yeah, like it's really working. Like we could probably, you know, pull that out of the way there. Um, and then the nurse, she had turned the monitor for the oxy away so that we couldn't see the numbers going up as she increased and increased. And I was at 10, and I had asked her to stop it at 4. And yes, it had increased and it was making everything stronger. And but she hadn't discussed it. She just was assuming. And when I saw that she hadn't listened to me and her body, like she hadn't respected my wishes or even talked about it with me to say, I think it's a good idea to keep it going. It didn't feel any different than the conception. So in that moment, I triggered and I broke, and my mom leaned over. And this is where it's like we know that we have such a connection because she leaned over and she said the words that I needed her to say. And they were, We need her. We want her. We love her. And you can protect her. We can protect her. And that's when she actually came. And that's where, you realize that your emotions and your fears and everything that are going through have a really big impact on your physical self and your ability to release the person who is supposed to be here. And so she's supposed to be here, and all of my fears and all of those things, and then she's on me and I'm like holding her, and I'm like, she's not really, it's not the same as the other babies, it's not the same. And the nurses thought that I was kind of rejecting her by trying to say, something's not right. And I was like, no, there's something that isn't right. Like she's blue, she's not latching, she's not all the things that I had experienced prior. And I know every baby is different, but and then finally it was the other nurse that came over and was like, yeah, no. And she swept her away and she took her to their special space for babies. And I was like, just kind of like left there, and it was morning. So I sent my mom and I sent the doula, and I just said, guys, you go sleep, and, I'm sure we'll be okay. And it wasn't long after that they said, we called in the pediatrician, who basically complained about coming in. They were on speakerphone and they're like, but I'm still sleeping, and I can't wait a few hours when I'm on. And it was just like, why? And then they said, we're calling the medevac. And that's when we were medevaced, and we well, she was medevaced, hooked up to all the different tubes and all the different IVs and everything like that. And I was just kind of sitting there waiting. And because of my hemorrhage, they usually keep my IVs in for 24 hours and make sure that I'm like not up and doing too much, just to be cautious about that. But they said, okay, well, you're going because, nobody else can go. And okay, so I was, I signed some papers to like transfer, and I didn't realize at that time that they actually had discharged me. And I was on a plane going to a NICU, and I still had my IVs in, and I was not prepared whatsoever to not have any care. I then knew that my baby was being cared for, so that was like a weight off my shoulders. And then I had my I took my first postpartum shit in a public washroom. And I slept on a bench for 3 days, and I didn't get any pain management whatsoever up until the third day. I had to take out my own IVs because they wouldn't touch me, as I wasn't the patient. And they couldn't even track down any pads for me when I ran out of pads. So I had to make my way to the pharmacy to pick up my own pain management and pads. And it wasn't until the fourth night where I got to sleep in a bed, because like the Ronald McDonald House there had a room open up, and I got to take a shower, and I got to not use a public washroom, and I had finally got the pain management. And then I was like, okay, like this is good. I feel like a person again. It took me 3 days to get to the pharmacy. The first day when I tried to go, I made it outside the NICU doors, and everything was so big and so bright. And I actually just literally melted into the floor and just started crying because it was just so big and I was in so much pain. And I hadn't eaten yet. There was no food available for me. And I remember like going back to the desk and I just said, I can't do it. And she was like, let me call the social worker. And so the social worker brought me into her room, and said, Marta, I can lose my job for this, but she pulled out a tiny little personal size bottle of Advil, and she gave me her personal stash of Advil, and that's how I made it the next day to the pharmacy, which was 2 blocks away. And grateful that she put up people above policy, because that's where I kept falling through the cracks, was policy, policy, policy. Like, it was just so horrendous to feel completely obsolete and invalidated and left alone. And I kept kind of asking, like, what's next? What is it? What is next? And I went on to, we got discharged. She was good to go. And we went to the airport, and she was 6 days old. And I went to check in for my flight home, and I'd made it there. I had made it to the airport on time, ready to go home. And the check-in clerk goes, well, how old is your baby? And I said, 6 days. And she goes, I can't let you fly without a doctor's note. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, we were discharged from the NICU not 2 hours ago. Like, like, you need a doctor's note? Like, does nobody know this? That, they have to be a full week old before you don't need a note? And she was like, no, I can't even check you in until you get that note. So I walked over to these, everybody kind of walking back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I sat there in the middle of all of those people, like, crying, devastated, because I had gotten there and I was alone with this brand new person. And I did get that doctor's note. I did. I contacted the social worker, and I contacted the social worker. She didn't answer. So then I had to contact the Ronald McDonald House, the person there, who then went to the social worker and got me the letter I needed. And it all worked out. And I got on the plane, and I was on there, and I'm sitting there, and I start talking to the person next to me. And it turned out that she was actually a NICU nurse herself during when she worked. She was retired, and she's going up to Whitehorse to visit her grandbaby. And I was like, I feel like the universe does help us. Like, it does help us and guide us. And even with that experience of the medevac and all of that, like, I feel like I was given this opportunity to fear losing my baby, whom 3 weeks prior I didn't know if I could bond with. And all of a sudden it was just this connection that we formed through fear and through love, because I needed her. And that was like such a beautiful process. So yeah, she's definitely meant to be 100%. So my next baby, who was born last year, she's just over a year old now. She was definitely my redemptive birth experience. And I really think it's profound to have such an experience where you are supported and you're heard and you're using your voice and you know what you need. And it's very healing to have an experience after the last experience. And so many people will stop at the last experience and they'll say, no, I can't handle that again. And I just know it's so much. And so this last experience, like 100% was so different and also complicated in the same sense. At the 18-week scan, they found that she had a velamentous cord. And that's where the first few inches of Wharton's jelly are not protecting the vessels and arteries. So it's a weak cord. And so, okay. And of course, I dive into research and find all the worst things that can happen. And they at 30 weeks, they said, come in for another scan, and they scanned again. And at that scan, the cord became obsolete. It became not important because they found a growth inside her tract. And I was then sent down to Vancouver for more ultrasounds. And then, I came home. It was right around Christmas time. And then I was, summoned back down for an MRI because ENTs love MRIs. And so I had an MRI, which was interesting in itself because it was at BC Children's Hospital where the MRI happened. And at 35 weeks pregnant, with all of the packing that they put around you to make you comfortable, to be able to stay still and like pause breathing and all the things with MRIs. I barely fit in the tube. So they actually kept like, and then I get stuck, and then they bring me out and they'd rearrange the packing, and then they try again, and it would be about 3 or 4 times before they got it right. And I was like, I'll just be comfortable, just get it done. And that's when they said, yeah, you actually need to have her down here. And that's where, that was my very first experience of having to go home from the MRI and get ready to plan to be down there for a month. And so when you're rearranging your entire life, like 6 kids, like all of the things that happen when you have a large family, making sure everybody's good, and nobody's going to take all of my kids. So it's like placing them in different places where they'll feel the most comfortable, and arranging for some of them with the most anxiety to participate and come down. And I really, like yesterday when they were talking about having to travel and be away, and and then having to come home to chaos. It was chaos when I arrived home. It was so like the attachment things, like when attachments are broken and then you come home and they're just even more so attached to you, and you're like, I don't know what to do right now. Like, and so with her birth, like I came back down, they did another MRI, the same thing, but I was even bigger. So it was the same, like, okay. And they said, yes, like we want to monitor how fast this growth is growing because we didn't see it in 18-week scan. Here it is in the 30-week scan, and again and again. And then it wasn't, so they thought it was like a cyst that had basically developed from when the thyroid is being developed. And that was the most common explanation for this. But they wanted to make sure when she was born that she could breathe. And that was a possibility of needing a surgery to get past that airway. So she then was, it was a planned from start to finish. Everything was so planned, like And I had the NICU team and the ENT team like 20 minutes away on call. Like they were there if the NICU team couldn't manage. And I had the nurses, like it was in the high risk unit at BC Women's. And they said to me, you can have as many people as you want. And I'd never heard that before. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have as many people as I want. So my mom was there, and my sister was there, and my oldest daughter was there. And she actually, when she walked into the room, everybody was like, oh, you're here. Where do you want to sit? And my oldest daughter goes, in the splash zone. So the whole entire, like everybody just started laughing, and it was just like that experience that we need to have, that we're together and we're here and this is happening. And the entire day, with the full on induction and the oxytocin, which was a completely different experience going from start to finish. I mean, even the day before, you know, we were on the C bus and we were going to North Vancouver, and we were doing things and walking, and then just the thought of like, I'm gonna have a baby tomorrow. Like I'd never had a planned time where I knew that tomorrow I'm going to have a baby. They've always been spontaneous, and it was so surreal in that, and very healing to have such like the coordination like that happened. I had a nurse that was coordinating all the different teams and getting back to me, and it wasn't me having to do that. So like, it's having that coordination and the advocates to say, hey, we got your back. I know that that's a lot of people to coordinate with, but here, this is just one person that you can communicate with that has all of the rest laid out for you. And then after I'd had her, um, because the ward is so big, like the women's hospital for birthing, it was huge. So I ended up, they allowed me to stay for 5 days, and they basically like they have porters, and they shuttled me back and forth to my room to the NICU and back and forth, because the NICU is very, very triggering. Like it is so beep, like all the beeping and all of it's so overwhelming with sound and hustle and bustle, and it's just like you need to get out of there. So I spent more time, and then on day 4, they referred me to my first midwife experience. And that was where I was like, wow. Like, so she met me first in the NICU for the first like visit, wondering, is this going to be okay for you? Do you really want us to check in on you? And I said, yes, I'm very much so. I need something. And she was the one that said, like, let's send a request for blood work. And I said, okay. And so they came in and they did my blood work, and then they found my iron levels, of course, really low. Um, and so the doctor came come in and said, Marta, your iron's pretty low. So, here's a prescription for pills. And knowing that I don't handle the pills very well, and being neurodivergent, like I'm ADHD, and uh I'm like fairly certain that I am on the spectrum as well. I just said I don't know if I can actually, I have to go home to 6 kids, and I need to rebuild, like, so if there is a possibility, can I please just do an IV? And they said yes, absolutely. And they did that. Like I asked, and then they
Hey,
did
Marta,
it for me.
sorry, this is Robin. I'm just wondering if we can wind down so we have a little bit of time for questions.
Okay, I
Thank
will.
you.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go quickly through this album. It was my number 5, and he because I thought it was a beautiful reflection as I was preparing for this presentation. So nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. And I think that that is a huge thing to think about when it comes to birth, really, because it is so natural to be giving birth. I love the laughing gas, but my mom, by my side again, and this was like the contraction, and then you can see my scar on my abdomen from when I had the surgery. Basically, they said point to where it hurts the most, and that's where they cut me open to take out my appendix. And then that's that aftershock look that I think most people get. And this was the first time I had actually had a male nurse. And he was so attentive, and my favorite nurse out of all of the nurses who have helped me. Um, so when I put these two together, my mom's hand is there on my head. And then I realized in the other photo that my hand then was on my baby. And then that photo where, I made this, it reminded me of that little otter that's holding on to their baby in that meme that's like, I made this, and it's like, I'm so proud. So, um, in my birth experiences, the most support, where I felt the most supported, the most validated, the most seen and heard was when I had the best outcomes for coming home and being able to manage the household and being able to manage all of those things. I mean, in some ways, I dreamed of being able to come home and just be, but, like I read about in the Chinese culture, they have like 6 weeks where they don't even leave their room for a month. They don't even shower. Like they just, in their culture, they have these ways of doing and being, and all of the other kids are cared for. And it was just like, wow, that's really cool. But I really believe that in Indigenous culture, there's also that care and that support. And I really feel like we do need to be more connected with people. We need to know people. We need to I just yesterday's presentations were so inspiring that these things are actually happening. Like I'm so grateful that people that it's shifting in ways it might not shift fast enough for me, or hasn't shifted fast enough for me, but it has shifted, and it will shift fast enough for my daughters. Like I have 4 daughters, and I am so grateful that we're going to have the support and everything that we need, and the knowledge and the know-how. And I think like safety is a big thing, and it's a holistic safety, and using our voices and speaking up, and it's so valuable and so important. And when we silence ourselves and we don't speak, we actually become dangerous. We we are not safe people if we do not stand up for what's right. We need to continue the hard work. And I'm so grateful for every single one of you who is doing the work. And I really feel like we need to keep pushing, because yesterday I was so like, wow, this is amazing. Like just the stories. And I just was like overwhelmed with all of these emotions that this is happening, and we need it to continue to happen because it is so sacred. We are so important and worthy of safety. And I think that'll be my conclusion.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I was tearing. I thank you so much for your beautiful sharing of stories. I think I can speak for everyone when I say we're truly honored to be able to hear your story. And thank you so much for that. And it's your bravery and resilience and strength really comes through. And I feel really honored to hear it. So thank you for that. We do have a question in the chat, if I could just read it out. So Maria asks, through what you did learn about faith and trust, and how does it support your decisions today in the work that you do?
Can you repeat? Or is there a
I
so
can
through
I can repeat.
okay.
So through all that you did learn about faith and trust, and
Mhm.
how does it support your decisions today in the work that you do?
I well, I don't I think it's just like a matter of yeah. I don't really know the answer to that. Um but it is like it's very important. I think I would go with just love and just love, like, and that's where faith and trust and all of those things are all under that umbrella of love. And you know, a lot of people say like the opposite of love is hate, but it really isn't hate, it's fear. And so we just need to love. We just need to love. And there's been times where I went on this, I read this book, and then I was like, oh, I'm just gonna like go around telling people I love them. So I did. I said, like all my clients, because I did hair for a lot of years. And so then at the end of their appointments, I was like, oh, I love you. Have a good day. And they were just like, wait, like, and that's where we need to come back around to love and to not romanticize love in a way. It's more like, I wish you well. Like love is just wanting people to be well. And like illness becomes wellness when we change the I to we. And that's really what it comes down to. And we do. We need to we need to speak. We need to use our voices. We need to roar.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story. We
Thank
can move
you.
on to our next presentation. Thank you again, Marta.
Okay, thank you.
So our next presentation, it will be Anishinaabemowin, A Journey to Culture, which will be presented to us by Gina Mount. Gina is a member of the Bolasoli First Nation Golden Eagle Clan. Gina has been a midwife for 14 years, is passionate about reclaiming Indigenous language and culture because this connects us to who we are, which Gina knows is essential to well-being. Gina considers themselves an old baby, as Gina is now beginning this journey and has so much to learn. Gina is working with the Wesekehingen Ne Nana We Din We Ji Win Gimmick clients, sorry, Gina, and communities to learn how to weave traditional teachings, languages, practices into our midwifery program at Mi Miguel Wisi Yao Miguin. so that our future babies will have a good understanding of who they are and how they are connected and belong in this world. Language is medicine. Gina will share her journey as an Anishinaabemowin language learner and learn about the spirit of language that is harm reducing and protective against suicide. Gina will include a little bit about colonization, language block, and tips on reclaiming language right from the womb, and how knowing our language, like where we are born, is critical to our identity. So go ahead, Gina.
Bonjour, Gakina Gachimsing Indunji, Gina Indigenous, Genu Dodem, Makwa Ozid Indigo, Nin Gatinawewin, Mount Carmel Clinic, Nagi Danoki, Madasa, Asha Nij, Daso Baboon, Nungum, Ni Gichi Minwendum Danoki Wasa Gijik Nananda Wayigamik. Hello, everyone. My name is Gina, and I'm a midwife. Thanks for the introduction. I know as Indigenous folks, we really love to position ourselves in our introduction. So I tried to do that in Anishinaabemowin or Ojibwe. But I also like to put that aside in that I know a lot of folks have some trauma when it comes to talking about where they come from. And so I also like to position myself where I am now. And so where I came from, I didn't get to grow up with my language or my culture. But now I'm so lucky to have my Meday community and family, my Sundance community and family, and also my language community and family, my work family, the cats. So this is sort of where I am at right now. I started my journey in 2022. And I decided at that time that I wanted to reconnect. I wanted to reclaim. I wanted to get to the roots of where I'm from and who I am. And there had been many obstacles in my way to do that. But around 2022, some of those obstacles shifted and I was able to take a year off and I entered into Red River College in Winnipeg, Manitoba. For their year-long program. And so it was during COVID, so there's not a lot of pictures, but I also was really lucky to be accepted into an immersion camp. And that became another one of my families. And so I feel super lucky, and you can see us here in the immersion camp having a lot of fun learning language. I have many, many teachers and language keepers that I am so grateful for and want to thank. And just for the sake of time, I know you can read the names. I'm going to kind of try to keep us moving along because I know I'll tend to blab on. I put this picture here of a river when we ask ourselves, like, why do we want to learn any Indigenous language? And I think for so many cultures, that river represents the ancestors, the blood, the life force. And that's what it's like when you learn language. You go deep into the past to the present, and you can dream about the future. And so I think a lot of people, I'm probably preaching to the choir, will understand that metaphor. Language is a gift to us from the Creator. It's medicine, it's harm reduction. I really loved listening to Dr. Barry Lavallee refer to language. That's the first time I heard it referred to as harm reduction. It provides continuity of culture, again, from our past to what we want to imagine as a future. And that is such an important part for healing, getting to a point where you can imagine the future that you want. It connects us with our culture in ways where when we hear our stories in our language, there's so much in there that you just don't get the opportunity to experience when you're speaking English. And even, we're speaking English here, that's very much the language of our colonizers. So we know that reclaiming language is a really huge part of reclaiming culture and decolonizing. And languages have a different worldview. They really allow us to place ourselves in relation to other people. And I'm trying to make it as much about Indigenous languages and not just Anishinaabemowin, but when you ask someone, who are you? And they're like, oh, I'm Spanish. I speak Spanish. I'm German. I speak German. And, we have many languages that not so many people speak them. And definitely some of my ancestors spoke Anishinaabemowin, but I did not grow up speaking that. And so how does that change our identity when we're saying, I'm Anishinabeg, but I speak English? The culture and the language are so intimately connected, and they give us a different way to look at the world and to relate with other people. There have been some studies on the West Coast that looked at the question of suicide, and it's obviously a really hard thing to study because it's quite a rare thing, thankfully. But they looked at the different communities and bands, and they tried to figure out, like, what's going on? Why are some communities having more suicide and other ones are having less? And when I can't remember here, I forget this quote. I think there were 53 communities or bands that spoke. They had a few things going for them. They were reclaiming their sovereignty. So maybe those communities had taken back control of their education, taken back control of healthcare, policing, fire services. They also had some cultural institutions, like buildings where they could go and gather to practice culture. But when they had more than 50% of people in their community that spoke their language, suicide rates went way down. Not only suicide rates, but young people were less likely to elicit risky behaviors like substance use or violence. And so, wow, like, that's all I can say. Like, it's that shows us, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but language is harm reduction. I want, without further ado, to introduce this really awesome answer to why, like, to kind of actually, this is Indigenous science knowledge keeper Leroy Little Bear. I've never met him or heard him, but I've seen him online and I love him, and I recommend everyone check out his videos. He's kind of like, he got a cult following with all the Sheldon Coopers of the world. He knows a lot about metaphysics, but he did a conversation, and this is just a very small clip at the end when someone asks him a question. So we can play it now.
Hi, I'm Jeff Evamy Hill. I represent Canoe, a Canada 150 project to create pan-Canadian undergraduate programs. I'm totally interested in what you're saying and think it's the right way to go. What kind of concrete, pragmatic steps do you think we can take towards renewal and indigenization over the next 5 years, let's say?
My best answer to that is learn Blackfoot. And the TRC saw the picture. That's the reason why in the TRC report, there was mention after mention about the language. If you are going to be able to change ways of thinking, you've got to be able to change ways of thought. And the best way to change those thought processes is to think in a different language, okay?
How awesome is that? I love it. And our languages hold so much, and so much, they're so powerful that even in English, it transcends sometimes. When you say the word cousin, It doesn't matter what language you speak, but if you're talking with Indigenous folks, it takes on a whole new meaning. And again, I'm speaking more for Anishinaabemowin, the language that I've been learning. There's a whole worldview in there. There's animate verb nouns and inanimate nouns, and so there's no he or she in Anishinaabemowin. And so just take a minute and think, if in your life you never heard people being heard to as he or she, how different would you view gender in your culture? And so this is how we know that lots of Indigenous cultures had very much a very different fluidity to gender, and built into the languages is often connection. So English is very different when we look at the nature and the land and all the things, we see them as resources, but in many Indigenous languages, we see them as our relatives. And you certainly wouldn't waste a relative or sell a relative, and so our languages will have a lot to do with addressing climate change and issues like that. And so much knowledge, and you can just see this example here with the different words and how, I was in a class with a really young girl and she was like, I hate it when people call me a stupid Indian. And I'm like, look at this language. It has so much knowledge right there in it. You can tell that Indigenous people were scientists. We have a whole worldview and a lot of knowledge, and it's a very dynamic, ever-changing language. And there's a spirit to it. It's alive, not just the animals and the trees and the water, but the language too is alive. And so for Anishinaabemowin, often the golden finch is represented as being the spirit of our language. So learning language, I always like to address a myth. Lots of people say, oh, only babies could do that. No, they're built for it. And as midwives, we know that babies, they start hearing around 20 weeks gestation. They can hear the placenta, they can hear the heartbeat. And then around 27, 28 weeks, they can hear things outside. They can start hearing words. And it really is, they don't even have teeth. So they have to learn, those teeth really help us form our words, right? So they do take a long time. And I think we take that for granted. We think, oh, they learn and they're so good, but they make all sorts of mistakes. And that's probably the biggest advantage that they have, is that their self-identity isn't solid. Because they're just starting out, and they can take it when they make mistakes and you laugh at them. Whereas adults are like, oh my gosh, they laughed at me. I'm never going to try speaking again. So if you would take an adult and give them like 3 years, is usually when someone can understand a child that is not their own. We would way surpass how babies learn language. So learning from them, it's about watching and observing. And so we have lots of personal things like that anger, that fear. It takes time. We're embarrassed if we make a mistake. It's very challenging too. So those are some of the barriers that we face, and there's systemic barriers obviously as well. Lots of racism. If our languages were never valued, why would the younger people want to learn them? Within the universities, there is a lot of disclusionary practices, or if the funding is going to be cut, it's going to be to a smaller program, which Indigenous languages happen to be. Obviously coming up, like the residential schools, and going to school can be a huge challenge for people. And so one of my teachers, Patricia Ningwant Nadeau, you can see her there on the top left. She was probably the first person who has addressed what we call the block. So that's when, and she has said to me, she's been teaching for over 40 years. And she said, in my class, most of the time, non-Indigenous students excel. And I think it's because they don't have this block. So speakers are just not able to get to get the sounds out, to get the words out. They might understand completely all that you're saying, but they can't get the words out. And a lot of that has to do with colonization. So when you think about us, we're learning a language that has been forcefully taken away from us, and that has causes so many different triggers, frustrations, anger. And when you're on your learning journey, you really have to address that but kind of it can also be a barrier if you get hung up on this and that's all you do is address this, which can happen as well. So I think we have to create safe spaces in our language environments where we can talk about that and we have the support, but we also have to go on and do the work of learning the languages. So it's yours. You don't have to ask to use it. Teach everything that you can. So even if you know 2 words, share them. I find from my own experience that 1 year in school versus that 1 month in immersion is by like hands down the best way to learn. Make it fun. It's ours, so let's own it. And so how do you approach it? You approach it by doing what you like to do, but doing it in the language. So if you like to dance, learn those songs or sing, or if you're big into cooking, get into your kitchen and start learning. What is this in my language? How do I say table? How do I say cook? How do I, so really just do what you enjoy doing, but do it in the language. And most importantly, like listen to the language. So I know if we're learning Spanish, we could probably pick that up in 3 months. We go to Spain, we don't speak English, we hear Spanish all the time. But in Canada, there really aren't too many places where you can go where it's like Anishinaabemowin land, where all you hear is that language, right? But as midwives, we're good at flexing. Sometimes we have to have a hospital birth when we want a home birth, so we will make that hospital as homey as possible. So do what you can to bring that in, immerse yourself. Now it's in 2022, coincidentally, when I started my journey, was the first year of 10 years of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages from the United Nations. And through that, a lot of funding is coming down for all languages all over the world and in Canada too. So I've seen, even since 2022, an explosion in resources, especially on the internet, because we went through COVID. So there's lots of online classes, there's lots of online videos, and ask yourself when you're at home, maybe, am I listening to the radio? What am I listening to? Let me just throw on some language videos. Even if you don't understand hearing, that's what the babies did, right? They listened for probably well over a year when you combine that time inside to outside before they even could form those words. I want to give a big shout out to my friend Janae Sinclair, who told me she traded in Netflix and learned the language. It takes a lot of practice. They say, I also taught English as a second language, but it takes about 17 times for one word to be said before you're going to remember it. So playing games. So I make these little go fish games, making sticky notes, putting them all over, those things, just always having it on your fingertips and on your ears, practicing. So I already said before, it's really hard, but here are some examples in my home. My home was just plastered with all of these different things. And again, as midwives, I feel we're so lucky to be in this intergenerational position. And even right there, when we do our initial visit, what language do you speak? So now that's a perfect segue. You speak English. What language do you want your baby to speak? And there's this amazing couple that I heard about. Again, I don't know them, but I have all the admiration for them. I think Emmeline Beaucamp and Monty McGowie, they're a young couple. They I think they fell in love in a language class. So that's another great reason to sign up for a class. They became a couple and decided to move in together. And they said, let's make this home no English. So they stuck to that. And then they were like, we're going to have babies. And hopefully by the time we have the babies, we'll be fluent. And that'll be their first language. And they did that. And of course, you know how babies happen. They happen always, you don't always plan for them, right? So they came before they were fluent. So there they were learning all together the language. And I just have so much admiration for that. And that is possible. And as midwives, we can inspire people to to learn their language and use the words, greet them when they come in. Just every time use more and more words. So even 10, 15 minutes a day, if you get that repetition, I bet you by the next forum, you'll be talking to me in your language. So yeah, this is an example of something that I put up in the clinic, and just trying to get everyone engaged and involved. It's great if you set some goals, and you know, we don't love the Western system where like, oh, you got 92% or 62%. It's a journey, right? And like Marta said, nature doesn't rush, but we get there. So I think you also have to have some grace with yourself. It's hard, and sometimes you might need a break. But I know when I went into Red River, I was like, by the end of this year, I'm going to be fluent. And I had to really, you know, recheck that because that program, and I'll give that tip to you if you're going to enter into a school program, talk to people who have graduated, because sometimes they look great when they're like, this is what the program will give you, but when you get in there, they don't actually deliver. I think it's changing, but that's one thing. Like, always talk to people who are in the programs that you might be interested in and see how it went for them. Track your progress, continue having fun. For me, you can see this Bemose top, Bemose Tribal Council here in Winnipeg. They're really great at keeping us on track because they hold feasts for the language and conferences. So every, you know, 4 months or so, I get to hang out with them and renew the passion. So the other thing is just, if you have any language speakers in your family, cling on to them. And if you could immerse yourself, like, oh, Auntie, your first language is the language I want to learn, go live with her and speak just that language. And when you're immersed like that, 3 months, 6 months, you're going to learn so much. If that really the answer is no English. And don't worry about if you're teaching your kids, because they will learn English. There's enough English out there. There's not going to be a fear of them not learning. So just embrace the mistakes and keep continuing on. That's everything. Thank you, Miigwech.
Awesome presentation there, Gina. Thank you for sharing. I know, as someone that is learning my language of Cree myself, I find sometimes I have what is called two tongues in my mouth. So I have like my Cree speaking tongue and my English tongue fighting to get the words out. So absolutely, I completely agree. Thank you for sharing. I so appreciate that. So I think we are now going to be taking a 10-minute break. So it's now time to grab a snack, stretch, check out the resources for the watch party page. I think it's going to be 10 minutes. And then after the break, we'll be doing our first raffle. So make sure the watch party's out there. Send in your participant's name. So see you in 10. Okay, so we are going to continue on with our forum. Our next presentation will be the Beaded Vulva project. The presentation will be done by Brittany Johnson. Brittany Johnson is a member of Beaver First Nation, as is an assistant professor at Macawin, I can't pronounce University in Anthropology Indigenous Studies. Johnson researches beadwork and performance art as sexual and reproductive justice for Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit kin. The Beaded Vulva project is one of the justice work she undertakes as both a researcher and a full spectrum doula. So take it away, Brittany.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah,
Great.
we're good.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm really excited to be here today and to talk a little bit about my project and to just share what I have been doing with you all, as I think it's pretty great work. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So what I'm going to talk to you about is the Beaded Vulva project. This image that you see here is a series of the beaded vulvas that were created with a group of gynecological residents that I taught this project to. I'll talk a little bit more about that particular experience when we get a little bit further into the presentation. My camera's not on for you?
Yes, your
Nope,
camera's
never
on
mind.
and the slides are up.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I it popped up for me as a notification saying my camera wasn't on, so let's just hope that we don't have any more issues here. So how I'm going to frame this first, I want to just introduce myself a little bit more. So my name is Brittany Johnson. I'm a member of Beaver First Nation. I am a mom of 3. I had the wonderful experience of being able to work with a midwife in my final pregnancy. And it was really life-changing. And I really appreciate the stories that were shared earlier before mine. They really resonated with me. And so I just wanted to thank you both for what you shared and the work that you were doing as well. So a little bit of background. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I love beads so much and why I think that beads can be great teachers and are important for us in all of the work that we do. And from there, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about, I'm going to tell you a story related to how beads as kin. And then from there, I'm going to go into a little bit more about the Beaded Vulva project specifically. So just so you know what to expect as we go forward. All right, so telling you a little bit about beadwork. So Anishinaabemowin, or the Cree language, which is a language that I grew up speaking, didn't speak it for a long time, and then have been on a journey of relearning the language as an adult. But the word for beads in Anishinaabemowin is mikisizak. And what's really interesting about that word, and for some of you who you may know that Cree language is based on animacy or inanimate. And this word happens to be an animate word. And what I think is really neat about this is that it is you can think, does it become animate because you wear it on your body? Or is it animate because it is something that you learn from and with? And I think it's a little bit of both. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as we go. But when I'm thinking about beads, I don't think of them as just an object, as just something that we use for art or something that we use for decorating our clothing, for example. I see them as an intimate being that we have a relationship with, that we can learn from, that we hear and gain teachings from. And in that way, I see that they also teach us about theory. And when I'm talking about theory, I'm not just talking about reading a book and getting all of this knowledge from the book. What I'm talking about is that you learn how to be in the world and how to be a good relative through beads. And I'm going to share a story about that in a little moment. I have a quote on here. You're going to see I'm going to have a few quotes from various folks throughout here. And there's Métis scholar Sherry Farrell Rosette. She talks about how beadwork is a master teacher, that the beads are animate storytellers. We have to read them, train ourselves to see the stories that they hold within them. So you see I have an image on the right here of some beadwork. This is work that I did on a pair of gauntlets a couple years back. And within this, I was incorporating some teachings that I had about that came from historical beadwork, like kind of old style beadwork. This isn't the finished product, it's just the beginning of it. And so you'll see that I have the 5-petaled rose on here. I have some leaves. I have a little bud down there. I also have some berries. And you'll see these things kind of in a lot of historical beadwork. And there are artists today who are using some of these traditional styles of beading to do new things with them, to teach about the body or to teach about other important things, and I'll show you some pictures of those later. But what's important to note here is that this is kind of a beginning for me in connecting with my grandmother through beadwork specifically. So I had looked at a pair of gloves that she had given me many years ago, and I was doing a new version of some of the same kind of flowers that I was seeing on those gloves, and then making them kind of my own. And so I want to tell you the story now of this was the first flower that I had ever beaded. And I'm going to tell you the story of this piece of beadwork now. So when I'm thinking about beadwork and how it is intimate and how we have this relationality or like kinship with beads, I always come back to this first piece of work that I ever did. So it's not the first thing I ever beaded, but it is the first type of beadwork that I'd ever done that I knew was to be a gift for someone. So I'll tell you the story about that. I was sitting up one night and I couldn't sleep, and I knew I just wanted to bead something. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew I had to bead something. And I started to bead a flower. Now, I'd never beaded a flower before. I had no idea how to bead a flower. I just was kind of going off of instinct. And as I was beading, I was remembering some of the teachings that I had received and from other beadwork artists and from some elders in my life about how when you are beading, you want to be putting good energy into the beads. So you want to be singing beautiful songs, or you want to be praying, and you want to be stitching love and care into every piece or into every bead that you are laying down. And that if you start to feel frustrated or you start to feel anger, overwhelmed, you should put your beads down and come back to them later. And so I started to bead this, and I was singing all of these love songs. I was singing a little Elvis, I was singing all these other things. And as I was beading, I felt this presence in the room with me. And it was like there was this presence that was telling me what colors to pick, was telling me how many beads I would actually need on my needle. Sometimes I didn't listen, and you can see the areas where the beads look like they're popping up because I was like, oh no, I'll put 3 there when I only needed 2. But I was beading and beading, and I before I knew it, I had finished the entire flower. I had finished the leaves. And I took a little bit of time away for it from it to stretch, and then I finished the rest of it. And the next day, I was looking at it, wondering what I was going to do with it and who it was for. I knew it was for someone. And I knew I had to back it with moose hide. So I grabbed some of my moose hide and I cut out the shape I needed, and I started doing some edging. I'd also never done edging before. But I was suddenly working on this edging on the beadwork, and I finished with what you see on the screen here. And then I cut out a little strip of moose hide, and I put it onto the little loop that I created. And as I was looking at it, I thought, well, I could look at it for all its little imperfections, but I actually felt so proud of what I had done. And I knew that this was good medicine that I needed to pass on to someone. And I immediately knew that I needed to give this to Nukum, or my grandmother. And so I went over to her house. And when I pulled it out and I handed it to her, she let out this big, like this gasp. And she told me that this is the exact same style of beadwork that my mom used to do. And I never had the opportunity to meet her. She said even the same colors, right down to the color, was exactly what her mom used to bead. And I knew in that moment that the presence that I felt with me beading that night was my great grandmother. And my grandma took that piece of beadwork and she hung it up on her wall right next to her bed. And she said that it would make her feel safe, that she could feel the prayers and the love that I put into it. And so she said whenever she was feeling worried or anything, that she would actually take it down and she would rub it between her hands and feel the beads on her hands, and it would bring her a lot of peace. And so it was something that really stuck with me. And a few years later, on my 30th birthday, I got a call at 2 in the morning, and it was my mom. And she told me that my grandma was being taken into the hospital. And we knew that she had aneurysms in her aorta and that they could go at any time. And so I started driving down to where she lives. And as I'm driving down the highway, we hit the corner. I started going around this curve in the road that we always called her curve. Because years ago she had been doing construction work as a flag person and had actually suffered an accident. Someone had ran into her. And it made it so she wasn't able to work anymore in that same capacity. And she had to change kind of what she was doing for work. And so we always called that grandma's turn because we knew, or grandma's curve, because that's the story of what happened there. So as I was going around this curve, I look up in the sky and this big star just starts falling down across the way. And at the same time, my radio's on and the song, Even Though I'm Leaving, starts playing. And I knew in that moment that she was leaving me. And within 10 seconds, my phone rang and it was my mom. And she told me it's the aneurysm. Try to get here as fast as you can, be safe. Thankfully, I was able to get there in time to talk with her and to be with her. And I had always had such a close relationship with her. She was truly like my second mom. Like she half raised me in a lot of ways. And I was able to have those moments with her before she passed. And the next day I was, missing her so bad. And I went to her house and I curled up in her bed just to smell her and just to be close to her again. And I looked up on the wall and I noticed that the beadwork was gone. And I went, where is it? Like, what happened? Like, because I knew she always had that there. And so I asked my mom about it, I asked my aunties, I asked everyone, no one knew where it was. And when we started to we needed to look in her wallet to get the items we needed to start preparations for funeral and for filing all the death certificate and such. That's where it was. This beadwork was there in her purse. And now I don't know for sure, but my heart tells me that when she knew this was happening, that she took that down off the wall and she took it with her so she could feel safe and feel my prayers in there and feel that love. And I actually I have it now today. I take it with me everywhere. I have it here with me right now. And it has her writing on it that I gave it to her on February 27th, 2016. And so I'm very grateful that I still have her with me. And when I touch it, I think of how many times her hands went over this same piece of beadwork, how many times she was connected to this. And it makes me feel close to her. And it reminds me of all of the beautiful memories and times that I have with her. So that's, I wanted to tell you this story as I feel the best way to explain what I mean about beadwork being so intimate and important is through this story. So that's why I wanted to share that with you. So to go ahead a little bit, this is a quote from Shailene Jobin, and it's talking about the importance of stories, and I'll just read it out here. She says, oral histories and storytelling are two ways to resist colonial attempts to erase Indigenous history and connection to territory. We need to tell more Indigenous women's stories. Telling Indigenous stories affirms Indigenous identities, Indigenous ontologies, ways of being in the world, the complex roles of women in stewardship of the land, and our important roles in governance. And so the story I told you is an important story to be told. The stories that we heard earlier about the experiences that the other speaker had with birth and with navigating these colonial systems that have affected the way that we're allowed to give birth on this land. They're important stories to tell, and we need to know them so that we can reaffirm our space as Indigenous women within our communities and within governance in those communities. So from there, I'll tell you a little bit more about how I think about sexual and reproductive justice, and then a little bit more about the Beaded Vulva project. So this all kind of happened over many years, and it's not where I thought I would ever end up or what I would be doing with my life. From a young age, I always wanted to be either an OBGYN or a midwife. But then I thought I'd be in school too long. So here I am, I'm still in school. I could have already been either of those by now. But what ended up happening is I started to become very much so obsessed with the idea of creating beaded anatomy in order to teach people about their bodies in a way that was accessible and that they could touch, so that they could have that experience of running their hands over the beads and they could learn. So this first piece here, this is meant to represent mammary glands. But even more than that, it is showing what happens when you have a clogged duct and what potentially could lead to mastitis. And so I started looking, I was working a lot with those teardrop shaped beads, and I couldn't stop drawing them on pages as mammary glands, and I knew I had to create it. So this is just one example of how I started to bead anatomy, because I thought, when you go into a doctor's office and you see the, images, which are usually a body cut in pieces, up on the wall, that it seems very impersonal, that you can't have a connection to what you're learning. And so I started to bead things like this. So I beaded this. And then I started thinking about how this was a way that I could further talk about the ways, as Emerence Baker writes here, that we need to address the ways our bodies have been silenced and made a cultural taboo for ourselves and other Native women. And so I started to think that, how can I make this reach more people? How can I bring these teachings that I've been given or things that I understand from a medical perspective? How can I bring those things to community and make it accessible? And so the top image you see up there, those were two-spirit beaded pasties that I made. And if you don't know what a pasty is, it's essentially a nipple cover. So I had a friend of mine who wanted to have some beaded pasties that they could wear to Pride. And they wanted to feel connected to both their gender identity and also to their sexuality and their two-spiritedness. And so I created these little pasties for them. And that was the first commission I ever had for a pair of beaded pasties. If you're looking for a pair, you can hit me up. I can make you a pair if you would like. And I wanted to start to create these so that folks would be able to wear something on their body. And so how I talked about running your hands over there and the healing and the prayers that go into that beadwork, I thought, what about if I am creating beadwork and putting these prayers into it, and then that can sit on someone's body and have that connection in their body, or potentially even on a site of past trauma, and how that might be a way of healing. And then on the bottom here, I have a picture of Virago Nation. They're an all-Indigenous burlesque troupe out of Vancouver. And they do some really incredible work. And I just wanted to highlight them as someone who you could definitely check out and should check out for the work they do. So here I started thinking about Kateri Akawenzi Dam's work. So in her work, she was working with communities at the height of the AIDS crisis in the 80s. And she started to say, how can we talk about sex or how to keep ourselves safe when we can't even make any reference to sex? And many in our communities, we joke about it. We joke about snagging, or we joke about, those things. But many times folks get very uncomfortable talking about sex or about our bodies. And as we know, A lot of this has roots in settler colonization, making it illegal for us to practice our traditional ways of teaching about the bodies and sexuality. So on the left, you'll see the first vulva I ever beaded. I still have it. It's actually on my keys. I've had it ever since I beaded it. And someone had seen it at a presentation I was doing, and they asked me to come in and teach a bunch of inner city youth. And so I did. And we talked about bodies, and we talked about consent and boundaries and what healthy sexuality can and should look like. And I started to teach them, have them push on their abdomen and say, do you feel that? Like, everyone, do it. You push on your stomach, and if you push, you'll feel it feels kind of hard, regardless of what body type you have. I've got a little bit of extra loving on there, and I can still feel that. And a lot of these youth were thinking that meant they were pregnant because they were feeling their abdominal muscles. So I explained, I'm like, that's just your six pack. But I taught them about the words for their bodies, because many folks don't know how to navigate the medical world and will face things like increased rates of being told that they need surgical intervention for things they don't. Forced sterilizations are still a thing that happen in our communities. And so I wanted to teach them about their own bodies so that they would know how to be safe in their own bodies. And on the right here is a placenta. It was beaded by Candace Newman, and it's connected to traditional teachings within her own community. So you see there's the fish, there is the star teachings on top, there's the moon, there's some cedar, some berries. And I encourage you to look that up. It's on Facebook, and they talk a little bit more about this particular project. But this is another example of an artist using beads to provide these traditional teachings that they can use within our communities. So the Beaded Vulva workshop kind of came out of that. And I was trying to get folks to bead with the really small beads at first, like 10s and 11s, and I realized unless we have a whole weekend to do it, it's not going to work. So I realized I needed to use bigger beads. And I started to develop little workshops. So the one on the left is my favorite picture. This was a group of high school students, and it was their idea to put their fingers to be the V for vag, they said. So they put their fingers all around. And it was every gender was part of that. And, I made them, I said, okay, so I want you to take your tongue. I want you to go like this, feel that inside your mouth. And I said, that's exactly the same kind of tissue that is inside of a vagina and also an anus. And they were like, Auntie, why did you do this? Oh my God, I'm never going to be able to feel inside my mouth again. I said, and you will never forget that is a mucous membrane, and it needs to be well lubricated, because you can risk infection if it gets, it's not ready to go in there, and you end up with all kinds of tears in there, and it can cause, bacteria can get in there. And so I'm teaching them these things as we do the workshops. And then I also started one other stream, which is for medical health professionals. And so these were all done by the group of urogynecology residents. It was their idea to put them all in, it was like a vulvaception by having all the vulvas in the shape of the vulvas that they had created. And so when I do the in-person workshops, I allow for a lot of flexibility for how folks want to make them. So you'll see that these ones, they have them kind of all different ways. But it's meant to be an example of what a vulva looks like. So I teach them, we have our clitoris bead, and that's always the brightest, shiniest one on the top. We also have our urethra bead, we have a vagina bead, and then we do the vestibule, the labia minora, and the labia majora. And we bead these together, and we talk about what these mean in our bodies. When I'm doing it with youth, I'll say like, yeah, that's your pee hole, or I'll say, things like that. So I use like that wording, but then I also use the medical terms so that they know them. With the medical health professionals, it's a longer workshop. It's about 3 hours. And I teach them the colonial history of gynecology in Canada. And also how to be better advocates for their patients. When I taught this workshop, not a single one of them had ever heard about a birth alert. None of them knew what that was. And so I taught them this history, and it just continues to grow. It continues to be something that I I never thought this would be what I would be doing, but I'm so passionate about it. And I'm really excited to see where it goes next and how I can reach both youth and other folks in our communities, but then also how I can be an advocate through beadwork to healthcare professionals. One other thing I'll point out with the vulvas is that in the way that I've designed the project, you might, if you know what a vulva looks like, you might wonder, is that a vulva? But I also made it in a way that is, it could just pass for like a teardrop or circular shaped piece of beadwork, because I know that it might not be safe for all people to go home with something that looks like a vulva. And so this is how we make them. And I'm pretty excited about this and seeing where it goes first or goes next. And if we have time, I would like to open it up for questions. But if not, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk about this with anyone. So thank you. Hi.
That is absolutely amazing. It resonated with me so deeply in a way that I don't really understand. I had a very avid beater in our family. She was very important to me. She was my mother's sister, my auntie. She would bead with leather work and things like that. So truly inspiring. When she had passed, she gifted me and my mother all of her beadwork, so I can understand like the relationship between the beads and everything. It's something that I hold very dear to my heart. So thank you again for that wonderful presentation. And
Thank you.
We just have a quick note in the chat. How can folks reach you and discuss purchasing workshops from you?
Yeah, I don't know how to put it directly in the chat. It's looking like maybe I have to go into this one. It's looking like I can only message if I go into participants. No, it's not letting me message people individually, but what I can do, I can post in the panelist chat the email address, and then if someone wants to post it for me in the general webinar chat, I'd be super happy to connect with whomever would like to do a workshop or wants to learn more about it.
Sure. And can you share your social media handle there as well?
Oh, yes, I can. It's I think I'm funny. It's Obeid Gyn. Um I'm not like I'm not super active on there, but I do post occasionally.
perfect. Thank you very much, Brittany. What a great presentation. And now we will go on to our final presentation, which will be Milk Medicine, Ancient Knowledge for Modern Healing, presented by Stephanie George, Heather Hendricks, and Casey Smith. So Stephanie George is a part of the, well, I'm not gonna like my pronunciation, the Odina Turtle Clan. She is a mom, wife, auntie, relative, Indigenous midwife, IBCLC, postpartum depression support person, past president for International Lactation Consultant Association, instructor at McMaster University, and a master's student at Health Science Education. Heather Hendricks is a Red River Métis registered midwife and IBCLC with roots in Red River, Winnipeg, and is now living and working in the Northwestern Territories. Heather's first experience supporting breastfeeding was when she was 3 years old and her brother was born. Heather is president of the Midwives Association of Northwest Territories, Canadian Association of Midwives board member, and a member of the core leadership of NCIM. And Casey is a settler of Irish descent, and she grew up on the Haslett territory in Kimat, BC, and is currently based in Teotatoka, Montreal, on Kanaki Gahati territory. Cassie is a staff person responsible for social media and other communications at NACM. She has a background in community-driven research and audiovisual art and strongly believes in the power of storytelling.
Hi. Tanshikiwao, everyone. I've just started taking Mitchif classes in January, so I'm going to try out some of what I've been learning. This will be my first time in public introducing myself in my language. So Heather Poitras Heinrichs Nishkashon. Yellowknife, Niwegan, P. Winnipeg, Aubin, La Rivière Rouge, Ototeo. So my name is Heather Poitras Heinrichs. Poitras is my mother's birth name. Heinrichs belongs to my father. And I live in Yellowknife right now, which is Chief Jaige's territory. And I am from Winnipeg or Red River for many generations. Last summer, Cassie and Steph reached out to me about working on a campaign for Indigenous Milk Medicine Week, which happens in August. This made me so happy. Steph and I have often talked about the need to prioritize this topic, and we dream of supporting more and more Indigenous people to increase their knowledge in this area. The timing was interesting for me. I had just come off a campaign advocating against significant reductions in funding for midwifery in the Northwest Territories, and I was in the middle of buying and moving into a new house. I was tired, but I only hesitated for a moment before responding, yes, I want to do this, and here's why. We know many of our communities have lower rates of breast and chest feeding, and we know that this is not because we don't want to breast or chest feed our babies, but because our communities have been directly targeted by policies developed to undermine this practice. As it turns out, colonialism and capitalism go hand in hand, and they work well together. And stopping breast and chest feeding practices benefits them both. I'm not going to get into the examples for now, because that's not what I'm here to talk about today. There is a great podcast on the commercial determinants of Indigenous health that explores this concept in great detail. I'll put the link in the chat after the presentation. What I want to talk to you about today is the beautiful and positive side of the story and why Indigenous milk is medicine for our whole communities. You see, Indigenous medicines are preventative and they are healing. They are bound to our worldviews and have been identified through rigorous observations collected over millennia. We understand medicines and their applications not simply as substances that produce an effect, but as living beings that exist within a complex network and whose impact is a result of the relationships we build with them. If we do not harvest in a good way the plants and animals that provide us medicines, giving thanks, protecting their habitat, nurturing their existence, they will not continue to sustain us. If we understand that human milk is a nutritious food that helps babies grow, and we recognize breast and chest feeding and lactation as powerful medicine that prevents and treats disease and supports healthy parenting, then we see that human milk must be treated accordingly. The mother who makes the milk must be given thanks, must be protected, must be nurtured so she can continue to provide this powerful medicine. Indeed, if we see babies as medicine for our communities, then we see that the whole family must be nurtured. The auntie who cares for the parents in the early days and takes part in parenting the child as they grow becomes medicine for the family. And so we must honor the medicine of the auntie. In this way, we develop networks of care in which entire communities are supported. When we care for others, we become medicine, and we will receive care as well. Let's circle back to where we began, with human milk. I've heard many things about breast and chest feeding over the years. It is love. It is the first teaching a baby receives. Anishinaabe elder Edna Manitowabi says that it is a treaty between mother and child. All of these teachings place human milk and breast or chest feeding within the context of relationship. This is because relationships are what allow us to successfully breast or chest feed our babies. And breast or chest feeding shows us how to build relationships. It's no accident that the act of nursing a baby releases chemicals in our brains that help us feel love, build bonds, and develop connections. With this in mind, we see the importance of supporting breast chest feeding within our communities as an important part of the work we can do within our communities. We needn't all be lactation consultants. Much of the work of supporting families to feed their babies doesn't require special skills. The breast or chest feeding parent must nurture the baby. Their close family, maybe a partner, a sibling, a friend, must nurture them. And the rest of the community must come together to encircle the family as they learn to breastfeed and to parent. So, Indigenous lactation consultants, or LCs, understand this context of breast or chest feeding within their community. They can access the knowledge and wisdom gathered over millennia, the understanding of community traditions and how those may have changed with colonization, and how our traditional practices are now evolving to meet the current environment. Indigenous LCs support best practices from both clinical and cultural perspectives. The everyday work that Indigenous LCs do seeks to build and strengthen relationships that protect and nurture the breast or chest feeding parent. We can create environments where the parents can see and learn about breast and chest feeding so they are prepared to feed the baby on their own, feed their own baby. They're not doing it on their own. And when feeding a baby becomes more challenging, we can help with clinical expertise and knowledge, some of it gathered over millennia, and some of it more recently borrowed from Western approaches. And this is where I'm going to hand off to Steph to continue this lovely talk. Thank you.
You have to unmute yourself, Stephanie.
Yes, thank you. I have a story about when these videos were made in contact, when I was contacted about the videos too. My last family member had recently passed, and I had accepted the offer of admission to go for my master's. And Cassie and the moms that are going to be in the video will be sharing. It was filmed during my last week at the birthing center. And it was lovely revisiting the moms that are going to be in the video today. Yeah, it was a nice way to end the time there. When I was pregnant with my second child, I was involved, or became involved with La Leche League Canada. It's a volunteer peer-to-peer breastfeeding, chest feeding support. And that changed my life. I think I had nursed my first child successfully. Probably should have had more help, mind you. But what I loved about La Leche League and how they approached parenting was natural and instinctual way of tending not just to the children or the family, but to me as well. It taught me a lot of patience. Nighttime parenting is a thing, and I think a lot of us in societies these days, maybe not more traditional people, there's such a pressure on families to have these babies sleep through the night. And if you're early, and if babies don't sleep through the night, then you have a baby that's difficult. But Creator made our infants to wake up often at night for a very long time, like physiologically and through some anthropological studies. Infants aren't really supposed to be sleeping through the night until about a year. So that nighttime parenting is really important. And how that works in with lactation, especially in the first days and weeks, is that the hormone that makes our milk, prolactin, it's highest at night. So when we have these babies in the early days who are waking up all the time to eat, like, and I'm talking about the first 2 or 3 days, it's actually a good thing because they're working with that prolactin to bring in the milk. And we forget that. Lactation isn't taught in medical schools. It isn't taught in nursing schools. It isn't taught in a lot of midwifery schools, except while I was at the birthing center. Our students got a month with me, hopefully. Hopefully they got the whole month. But it's not taught. And if it's not taught, people don't see it as important to learn about. I'm taking my master's program is in health science education. And there was one lecture all about how students in class will say, well, is it on the test? Because then I'll remember it. So if it's not going to be in the test, then I can ignore it. So if it's not taught in med schools, nursing schools, midwifery schools, they learn that it's not that important. A lot of our teachings have been lost. I've been privileged to go to a lot of communities in Canada to share what knowledge I have and to learn from them as well what their traditional teachings are. And we forget, because of the government interference that happened, we were pushed to not breastfeed. And then it became not important. And it's things that we forgot the last few generations. We're supposed to nurse our children for a long time. The baby, the child, the toddler is supposed to tell us when they're done. Some people are done earlier than others, and that's okay. When we nurse our children for a long time, it's like we are their spiritual battery because they have to reconnect with us when they are sad, when they're hungry, when they just need some comfort. And that's not a bad thing. That's the way Creator made parents and babies to interact and protect each other. Heather was talking about the hormones that nursing parents get when we are able to nurse our babies. And it's vitally important for our mental wellness. There's studies out there that show when a nursing parent can successfully and happily breastfeed, their chances of getting postpartum depression actually go down. They get more minutes of sleep at night. And with that, they get more high quality minutes of sleep at night. I've worked with a lot of people who said that they wanted to get through the first little bit of nursing, probably like to 2 weeks, and then they wanted to pump so their partner could nurse the baby at night. But then out goes their milk supply because they're not nursing at night anymore. It's great to have the parent involved, the other parent who's not nursing involved, but a bottle isn't the only way to show love. That skin-to-skin contact is so important for everybody in that family. It calms us, it unites us, it makes us feel loved. With the intergenerational trauma that so many of us are still working through, there's studies that show that successfully breastfeeding and chest feeding can help us overcome intergenerational trauma. And how that works is when somebody else is holding the baby, the mom will start whispering, or the nursing parent will start whispering, "That's my baby. They're hungry. Can you give me my baby back?" And when that person understands that they're being listened to, then they can start saying with more strength, you know, I'm hungry. Can you get me a sandwich while I'm nursing? Or can you get me some water? And when they see that they are supported, because people should be supporting them, they feel better about themselves, and they're able to nurture that infant and toddler and child from a center of love. And the other parent, they get that too with that skin to skin contact. I teach, when I work with a mom and dad, I teach them both that skin to skin is vitally important. It moderates the temperature, it decreases, or it moderates their glucose levels. It's the best thing when a baby is cold. A lot of times I had referrals where babies weren't gaining weight, but their diapers were fantastic. It's because the babies were cold and they just needed to be held skin to skin with people longer throughout the day. Like Heather said, when the nursing parent is able to nurse for like 3 to 6 months, it dramatically can decrease their chances of getting gestational diabetes. And it always makes me livid, and I use that word appropriately. It makes me livid when I go to diabetes conferences and nobody talks about that except me in the chat section. Why aren't we teaching that anymore? Our parents need to know they need to choose to breastfeed. They should never be guilted into breast or chest feeding, ever. But they need to have a full informed choice discussion, because it changes hearts. It changes physiologies. It changes so we have more wellness and less depression. It decreases chances of breast cancer, ovarian cancer. We all need to start talking about the benefits that the nursing parent gets, not just to their pocketbook. Yeah, you save a lot of money when you're able to fully nurse your baby. Not everybody's able to. But there are ways still to teach that parenting through skin to skin contact with bottle feeding parents as well. Milk medicine is for everybody. It helps both parents. It helps the children. I had a couple clients once, oddly, 2 clients over a Christmas holiday. They both snuck breast milk into their partner's ears at night because they were coming down with ear infections, and the men had said, "Ew, no, I don't have stuff in my ear." They woke up and the ear infections were gone. And they said, "See, I didn't need your milk anyway." I don't know if they were fessed up, but I love that story. So talking about milk medicine is here because it's important and it needs to be prioritized again. The women that are going to be in the video that Cassie beautifully put together, look at their eyes when they're talking. Look at their body language. I cried. Granted, I was reliving memories too, but it's beautiful. It's as beautiful as birth. We have gynecologists and obstetricians, to help us when breastfeeding or when labor and delivery can go a little wonky. We have lactation consultants and other breastfeeding support people to help when breastfeeding goes a little wonky. Everybody who's working in maternal child care should have at least a 20-hour course. Updated yearly. As lactation consultants, we have to either write the exam every 5 years, or we have to have like 75 educational credits in certain topics for a 5-year period. So we are constantly learning. If I don't know more about breastfeeding this year than I did last year, I personally feel like I have failed. And I have learned stuff this year. Yay me. But like I said, we can't be guilting people and forcing people into breastfeeding or chest feeding if that's not what they want to do. Everybody needs love and support. That support that people get after they have babies, that in itself can help decrease postpartum depression. There's a great TED Talk by Chandra Miracle on YouTube in Toronto. And she talks about how it's not postpartum depression, it's that we're failing in postpartum support for our families. And I tend to agree. I had 2 really bad cases of postpartum depression because I felt utterly and completely alone. The last baby, I didn't have anything, which was wonderful because I had the support. So I want to leave you with love and with patience, because if breastfeeding went well for everybody, there wouldn't be lactation consultants. We can all get through this together. We're here to share our knowledge. We are all here to share our knowledge. That's why we're in this conference. And I say Nyawa, and I will be turning the time over to Cassie.
Hi, thank you so much, Steph and Heather. I think as the experts, they've said really what's, I think, meaningful and important about milk medicine and its transformative power. And I was really privileged to be able to work with them to help amplify some of that knowledge, amplify some of those messages, these voices, and to be able to go down to the birthing center and visit Steph on Six Nations and speak with some of the parents that she had supported as a lactation consultant. And I think a big takeaway from this is that this knowledge and this understanding of milk as medicine really just needs to get out there more. And as part of that, we've created a milk medicine page on the NCIM website and are doing a social media campaign with all of the interviews and videos that we collected. And so I'll just show you that now. Sorry, of course I have a million tabs open. Okay. So here's the NCIM website, and as you can see, there's a new milk medicine tab. So this is not something that something that is gonna remain at the forefront, we hope, because talking about Indigenous midwifery without talking about milk medicine, there's a big chunk missing. So on the page, we talk a bit about some of the ways that milk is medicine. There's a section on who are indigenous lactation consultants. Just like Indigenous midwives, Indigenous lactation consultants have unique expertise in lactation and breastfeeding support, but they are also aunties and members of their communities, and so they bring that clinical expertise alongside cultural safety and cultural competency. And here you can watch a video of Steph explaining some of what that looks like. There are some initial links and resources for people that work with pregnant people, newborns, families who might need or want to upgrade their knowledge of lactation and how to better support families with lactation. And we're hoping that this will really reinforce the kind of amazing partnership that can happen between Indigenous midwives and Indigenous lactation consultants when they combine their specialized knowledge to support First Nations, Métis, and Inuit families. And then down here is the campaign. So It is primarily a social media campaign, so I encourage everybody to follow us on TikTok and Instagram at NCI Midwives. That's where all the videos are going to be posted. Over the coming weeks, we're going to be releasing new ones weekly. There's a lot of knowledge to share. There are a lot of stories to share. So I hope that you'll follow along with us if you're on social media. And in fact, the first one of Steph is up on our brand new TikTok account. It's the first ever video that we posted. So please go check it out. But we've also included a bit more information. I'm going to show you this video that has some of the highlights from some of the videos, the interview videos that we captured in a second. But I also just want folks to know that you can also learn more about everybody that participated and lent their time and their voice and their experience and their expertise to the project. So there's more information about Steph and Heather here. And then we get to meet the parents and the mothers that participated. So there's Jess, Kylie, Becky, Awahio, and Charlie. And I'll let you go through and introduce yourselves to them via the webpage. But because we're running out of time, I just want to show the video to give a sense of what we kind of got into.
Indigenous milk medicine is powerful. The milk that I produce as a mother is definitely medicine. I learned that it changes constantly and for exactly what he needs. And I think it's just the most beautiful and sacred thing ever. It can help with skin issues and infections and basic immunities. It helps babies regulate their blood sugar. It helps with all kinds of different biological processes.
Milk is medicine, whether it's for your baby or it's to help your older children with ear infections, eye infections, eczema. It helps in many ways.
I'm very blessed to be able to choose to breastfeed. And I also feel like breastfeeding or producing milk chose me as well.
Milk is also medicine for the parents who make the milk. People who breast or chest feed, they're less likely to have diabetes later on in life.
For every 12 months that parent can nurse, it decreases their chance of getting breast cancer by between 12 and 28%.
Being able to feed my babies from my own body is really powerful and just amazing, really.
A gift from the Creator to help us provide and nourish our children. And I love that.
It's so much more than just milk. It's connection, it's bonding. Every day I feed her, and that's like me giving her something that I made with love and something that's gonna nourish her soul and feed her, help make her feel good, and it makes me feel good. I think asking the question of viewing milk as medicine is similar to asking the question, is love medicine?
The parents are giving their baby love. The baby's learning about love, and our communities and our families need to come together and support those people. And that's why Indigenous milk medicine is so important. It helps our communities to heal.
There's a lot of research coming out showing that when somebody can happily nurse their babies, that it helps overcome intergenerational trauma because it forms that trust and love and attachment between the parent and the baby and helps both of them feel valued and wanted and loved, which we all need more of. We need that attachment. And you can do it with bottle feeding. It's just a little bit less steps when you're breastfeeding.
Breast or chest feeding is an act of Indigenous food sovereignty. We have control over the food that we are feeding our babies, and nobody can take that away from us.
Back before the colonists came, we had our traditional medicines and we had our milk medicine, our human milk.
There's so many different policies that have stopped us from practicing this food sovereignty.
Indian agent food directives that we were given on our reserves, where they gave us a can of formula and said, this is what you have to feed your babies now.
And it's because one of the main benefits of breast test feeding is that it's how community control over food starts, when we are able to successfully feed our babies the healthiest thing that they can get. That sets the whole community up.
Why should Indigenous people work towards their lactation and breast and chest feeding again is because it's ours. It's what Creator designed for us and our families.
Advice I would give to Indigenous parents just starting their infant feeding journey would be to talk to your aunties, lean on your circle of support.
Really be gentle with yourself. You're new to this, you're going through a big transition in life.
Don't let anyone tell you that you can't co-sleep with your baby.
You need to have a lot of patience. You just need to take that time to sit there with your baby. If everything else is going on, you just need to sit there and feed your baby.
If you have access to a lactation consultant, specifically an Indigenous one, reach out to them.
I'm a new parent, right? I'm a new mom, so I only know what I know. I don't know about latching and positioning. It seemed like it was rocket science. And then what I got from my lactation consultant is this feeling of I can do it.
I'm so grateful that we persevered and were able to get a nice latch together, because it's having him grow up breastfeeding has been the most amazing experience of my life.
It grows love. Breastfeeding grows love. It helps babies grow. It helps communities grow. It helps people blossom when it's well supported.
So thank you very much for your time. I think that's it for me. I'll throw it back to Evelyn or to anyone who has questions for Steph or Heather.
Wow, absolutely amazing presentation. I had tears in my eyes, recalling memories about my own breastfeeding journey. The video was amazing, and you're also passionate about the work, and it really comes through. So thank you so much for that. Now we are going to close out our forum. I'd like to pass the floor over to Maria Campbell, who opened our forum yesterday and will be closing our forum today.
There's so many buttons to push. Anyway, that was pretty emotional listening to that. I told you a little bit of a story when I opened, and I had totally forgot about learning to latch, and I mean, I remembered it from my own breastfeeding of my own children, but I forgot about my grandmother teaching women those when they would come to see her in the summer. And I remember walking into the tent one day when all of the old ladies were sitting around with the younger women. I think I told you that in the summer they would put up tents, and they would come from different places, and they would meet and have gatherings kind of like this, but not like this. And all of us little girls who helped our grandmothers would be allowed to come in. And I remember we were all playing outside and running into the tent, and there was a mother sitting in the middle of the tent and the blankets that were on the floor, and she had all of her top off, and she was breastfeeding, or well, she was giving a lesson. One of the old women were showing the younger midwives what they were supposed to do, and just remember them talking about sagito and maskiki, the medicine. Love medicine is what it really translates to, and how important that was for us to learn to teach our babies, and that was how we would teach them, and just as a little girl thinking of my mother and all the times that I saw her sitting up at night with a coal oil lamp and taking the baby up, and I'd be in bed because we slept all in one room. We only had a 2-room cabin. And watching her feed the baby and being almost jealous of the baby because you couldn't be a part of that little circle. But thinking about my own life and how important it was that I had that as a child, because I would never have changed the course of my own life if I wouldn't have known about skin love. And even today, when I work with a lot of students, how important that is. And you can always tell when you're working with young people, the ones who have had that and who haven't, and how much faster it is for us to do healing work in our community when our babies have had some of that as little ones. So I just wanted to share that. That was, like I said, it was really emotional. So I'll be snorting all the way through my prayer. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to take in the gathering, but we had our first midwifery, our second midwifery meeting this morning, and we're trying to start a midwifery program in our university. I work with First Nations University, so I just wanted to share that with you. And I was thinking about you this morning as we were, talking to a whole lot of people, and just what kind of a place do we want and how do we want to teach, and what's important to teach. So yeah, I'm really grateful. I'm grateful that I've known so many midwives in my life. And there isn't a day goes by that I don't thank Creator for that. So I'm going to do the prayer in my language, and the prayer is to Beaded, and there's no way to translate that word except the easiest word is the boss of us all, and to our mother, the earth, to our first grandmother, and to our 4 grandfathers that look after the 4 doorways, and to our Creator, or our great mystery. So that's who I speak to. And I would like us to think about all the babies that are on their way right now. I have a painting of my granny, and I always think about her when I do prayers, because there's a picture of her standing out in the snow like this, and she's staring off. And we used to ask her, what are you looking for? And she'd say, I'm just checking. This would be in the morning. I'm checking to see if it's coming today. And for some reason, she was always right. She'd say, it's coming. She'd tell my dad, harness my horse. She always drove a little buggy or a little cutter in the winter. Harness my horse. My baby's coming today, or else it's not coming. I can't hear it anywhere. And so I'm thinking about that right now, the babies that are on their way. And some of you are going to have to rush out to them and keep those in mind, those little midwives that aren't born yet. Haugia magate betsigain, Igo genenaskum dane bemiugisaga, Igo genenaskum dane miasagum matsun kapea wihia. Genenaskum no kexwaka kapegi sitatsikum mama kamama wapitsik. Kanoe matsik gwetsem dan, Timage matsik, Igo kemiasni igan matuskewan katotake. Auminan gawiaski kistamina. Genenaskum dan, Kiumaksewatsun katahkun naman. Kiaka snamauya kapiksquesta mauya. Awasaka nipawista mawatsikista. Igo kemiasakan mako pakitskaman. Witsihinanistanane kotoa kakitskamat. Joashim snana kemiasako mameskanau. Kausita mawayako. Hawina nohkom notagoatayukan kistamina naskum dan kapiwitap matsakuke. Kapegi sihtatsegeva. Wetsim nkapikskoista mawatse. Kawitsi hia kahkio so kemoin katahwanamak seoatsuin sagituen. Emes emiasek meskanaukausista maakuk. Soasem snauakusem naak kahkio tsapana. Witsi hinan jokuan matoskiwen katutama. Ekukek kanuemek pikuk emiasni komakatutaki. Hauminen muso makaneopi kistoamine kinaskum nao. Nesto emiasiku takapipihtuvatai kinaskum kahkio. Aunuhtawi pektymagimnan. Kanuemnan. Vitsi hinanumak kapmuhtea. Kakaskita keukakahkio katahkunama. Ego kamskamaki takasta. Kani pawistanawa kukukik. Soasum snanak. Au kilnaskum. Hai. Mercy.
Thank you, Maria, for your beautiful opening and closing of our forum. We appreciate your centering of the work that we all do in our communities to support life givers in their life cycle transitions.
Hai.
We want to thank our watch party hosts and all our participants who joined in to make the forum a success. Thank you all for the good work that you are all doing to improve the health and well-being of our communities. We see you preserving our Indigenous culture, caring for the whole person, taking back your place in your communities to give families the best support, and building trust and better health outcomes for Indigenous families. NCIM wants to continue to support you. Please let us know your thoughts about the forum and what topics you'd like to see next year. Please fill out our survey. Robin will be putting a link in the chat and fill it out now. Watch party hosts, remember to share about your event and follow up with our staff. Please enjoy our virtual grab bag. It is rich with information and inspiration to advance your efforts to bring health and wellness to Indigenous families. We look forward to seeing you at the gathering again soon, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Evelyn Fisher, coming to you from Opaskwayak Cree Nation in Manitoba. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.